Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mark Reyes and I'm taking you behind the scenes of how applications actually run in production. When you set up your Kubernetes cluster to run your applications in productions, it's very important to think of security. Security in the sense of who has access to my cluster, who has access to what resources on my cluster, and what are they able to do with that access. This is the point where you start thinking about RBAC, which is role-based access control in your Kubernetes environments. Role-based access control is how you assign roles to individuals or entities that have access to your cluster. When you think of role-based access control, there are three main things you need to think of. You need to think of the subject, you need to think of the role, and you need to think of the binding. Your subject is what you're giving access to your Kubernetes cluster, and that could include a group, it could include a user, or it could include a service account. A group is basically a combination of different users and different service accounts that you want to give the same role. Now, the role is the actual permission that you're going to be giving to your cluster, and that would include the verb, which is actually what access this person has. Get, list, edit, delete, watch, those are all verbs, right? And you give those verbs, which are actions, you give them to resources. And the resources could be your pod, could be your deployment, could be your stateful sets. And that's how you create a role. You create a role by verbs, using verbs to determine the kind of access that a subject has to a resource. And that's what makes up a role. You can have a role that is going to be only specified to a particular namespace, or you can have a role that is cluster-wide and can be used on any namespace within the cluster. And that is the difference between roles and cluster roles. Cluster roles are the scope of cluster roles will be the entire cluster, while the scope of a role will be just a specific namespace which you will specify during your role creation. Now, after you've created your roles and you've created your subjects, you need to bind your role to a particular subject using bindings. So you can bind a role to a particular subject using role bindings, or if you're using a cluster role, you can use cluster role bindings to bind your role to your subject. So with that, you can create role-based access control into your cluster and tighten security so that everybody doesn't have the same level of access to everything. You don't want junior developers, for example, to have high-level access so that they don't break something, and you need your admins to have access to everything, while maybe developers of a specific application within your organization to be scoped to just that specific namespace where the resources of that application would be running. I hope that makes sense. See you in the next one.